Hello and welcome to the Silent Evil Podcast. I'm Spencer Scott Holmes.
And I am Cameron.
And yeah, we had a little bit of technical difficulties getting this episode started right off the bat. One of those ones where we were just fighting microphones and browsers were deciding to turn them off and so on. So yeah, I'm using a little bit different setup here, actually using the webcam's microphone, but I think it's a decent enough one that will get us by. So, I mean, and Cameron, he's over in Denver right now, so he's hanging out at the hotel. So it's one of those ones.
Gotta keep doing it, man. Gotta keep going. Hell yeah.
But yeah, it's like, you know what? It's like with the time seeming bright, we're going to podcast, come hell or high water, you know what? And we're going to talk all about Resident Evil 5 because we just did a little playthrough. Cameron's never played this before, and this is one of those games that I know it has kind of that some people think it's the greatest Resident Evil ever, and some people go, this is where the franchise just went straight downhill and never came back. So it does have a lot of mixed match, opinions, but this is one of those games that me and Buddy did. We did like a top 3 of every single, I think top 3 or 5, I can't remember. I think we did 3 because we thought that if we did 5 it'll be too much, but we did through all the PlayStation generations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we did like what's our top 3 favorite games from each section. And when it came to PS3, I'm pretty sure I put Resident Evil 5 as my number 1. Like that's how much I like it because it sounds weird, and I know technically I had it on Xbox 360, so I thought it was a little bit misleading there. But it's that game that's like, I go back to it so much. I've played it so many hours over the years. I mean, I've probably easily put like 100 and something plus hours into this game. I know just on my 360 version, I think I had like 60 something hours on it, let alone what I put into PlayStation 4 and Xbox Series X and PC as well. And I just think there's so much to do in it. It's got so much variety and different types of gameplay, extra DLC, the best mercenaries mode known to mankind. And then at the same time, I think it's one of those games where like it has just such a fantastic co-op in it, whether you do it online, split screen, whatever. I mean, it literally rivals that of Gears of War and Halo for how good it is.
Yeah, very much agree. Very much agree. Because, like, as Spencer mentioned, never have actually played through Resident Evil 5. I have played those first 2 levels a million times, but I've never actually played through it. But, coming off the heels of, like Resident Evil 4, because I remember when Resident Evil 5 came out. And my good friend Timothy at the time was like really into Resident Evil, and he was talking about like how much he loved that game. Love the mercenaries mode. Basically, just like word for word what you just said, about it and whatnot. And he kept trying to get me to come over to play co-op with him, but I just never did it because I was like, during that era. What year did this game come out? Like
2009.
9. Yeah, so that was like deep into my Halo glory days and all that. So I mean, like that's what but yeah, no, stellar experience. I mean, I loved. Being able to finally actually play through it, and I mean, we'll get to it a little bit later in this episode, but the very famous Chris punching the rock situation, I finally got to witness it firsthand.
It's starting to all make sense where that came from.
Yeah. I mean, literally everything I've heard about Resident Evil 5 up until we actually sat down and played it together was that one scene. Like, that's the one thing I knew about the game walking into it. But
it would make more sense if Wesker punched a boulder when you really think about it, because he's shot himself up with drugs throughout his entire life. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but yeah, Chris, he's just that angry. You know what I mean? He's gonna save Sheva, and then Sheva pulls herself up anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. You have to sit there tapping square or X or whatever for like literally it feels like 45 to maybe a minute. It's a long time. And when you keep dying over and over, it's like, okay, here's the carpal tunnel kicking in each time.
Right. Yeah. No, it was I've really enjoyed playing through it. So like the leading into playing Resident Evil 5, Spencer and I were kind of brainstorming on like what's the next game post Pro Country, and decided to do a Resident Evil title, and thank God it was this one that had co-op, So yeah, thanks for downloading it on PC and getting that going with me. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. And I will say this, there's a lot of people out there that only play this game single player, and I almost think you're missing out on a whole lot of the experience by playing it, by yourself. It's still really good, and you can still have a whole lot of fun, but really, when you throw in that extra buddy, it's just incredibly awesome, and it's something that I've always wanted literally since the first Resident Evil game. I mean, just literally the original game, Resident Evil 2 and all that stuff. I always thought in my head, I'm like, just imagine if you had it where like one player played as like, Chris, and the other player played as Jill, and you could literally interact with each other. And I always just thought like really grand scheme, like one of those ones where like one person could totally run complete other side of the mansion, do some puzzles, the other person could go somewhere here, then you could come together for like boss fights and so on like that. I always wanted to see something like that. And I remember there's the Resident Evil DS one for the 10th anniversary, and they put a little multiplayer mode in there. And I remember back then with me and RJ, who was on the original variation of Silent Evil and so on, we got so amped up. We're like, oh, dude, they're going to have the multiplayer in there. And that's what we literally thought. We're like, oh, it's going to be like, you can play through the whole campaign and whatnot. And really what it is, it's just like a light version of kind of like a Resident Evil 1 Mercenaries. Still kind of cool, but it's still kind of a little bit, it was a little half-assed because the other player was just this triangle that was floating around in the screen. Like you couldn't actually see each other in it. I mean, maybe a little bit of DS limitations then.
Sure.
But in my opinion, Resident Evil 5 gave me what I kind of always wanted, was like, just imagine that co-op experience, but with Resident Evil. And I think it does it really well. I know it sort of takes away a little bit of the scariness because, of course, if there's somebody standing behind you, things are never going to be nearly as scary if you're just there by yourself. That's the given. You know what I mean? Because I really don't think that Resident Evil 5's technically any different than 4 for the most part, No.
And there's so many marriages of ideas that leak from 4 into 5, like the El Gigante fight, it's a different fight for sure. Same character model, same, all the things and whatnot, so the chainsaw dude, for example. I mean, they brought back so many things, but at the same time, like, I'm not upset about it as a new player because it is in a co-op experience, whereas in 4, you're just playing as Leon as yourself, having to fight El Gigante or having to fight the chainsaw dude or whatever. Yeah, having the experience as having a co-op partner in the environment alongside you, yeah, absolutely gets rid of the scare factor 100%. Like, I don't think I was afraid of anything in that experience that we played through. There's jump scares for sure, things that would jump out and get you real quick, or whatever. But yeah, nothing that like led me to have like utter dread of like walking down the hallway, But I think that's just, like you said, it's just a caveat of playing a co-op experience. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's definitely the kind of the difference is, you have somebody there that's always going to generally recover you. And by this point, we've gotten where there's checkpoints. I know Resident Evil 4 had them too, but like that kind of adds like another like deterrent to like, oh, well, worst case scenario, we just start from the previous door and we go again at it.
Right.
It's not that thing where like, you lose in Resident Evil 2 or 3 or something like that, and you go, when was the last time I saved? And then you're trying to think, you're like, wait a second, how much have I done since then? You know what I mean? Like, do I need to get this still? It's like, there's none of that. So I feel there's a lot of these things that dilute the horrorness, but at the same time, I still think there's a lot of that there. There's still things that will jump out and get you. You'll jump, you'll get scared, you'll run in terror. There's enemies that with one-hit kills and all that stuff. There's enough stuff in there that keeps the horror totally alive, yet you're doing it in a very action kind of military-oriented, thing. Because once again, this is the era of Gears of War, and so many games kind of aped Gears of War after that came out. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's totally what things went for. Like, Gears defined the late 2000s for sure, of the muted colors, the grizzled war vets. Everybody's got to be kind of a little bit extra muscular and so on like that. The cover system, of course, which Resident Evil 5 somewhat has it in there, and it's like you kind of forget about it for the most part. And then once in a while, it's like, oh, I'm stuck behind cover. What the hell happened?
Oh, yeah, I can actually do that. Yeah, no, I was making comment when we started the game up. It was like the very first scene of Chris driving in and the Humvee and whatnot, going into South Africa or whatever. And just like the framing of all the shots and the way that they're like filming, like the Humvee coming in, the way he pulls into that town, gets out, like things are kind of like you said, like very muddy and just browns and grays, like in terms of color scheme and whatnot. I had made a comment that like it reminds me so much of the very first level of Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots, like when Snake shows up in basically the same situation, just Afghanistan, and so yeah, I mean, yeah, the color palette of that era is very, very interesting because there's not a ton of like artistic flair, I'd say. It's very like grounded in reality, which I think plays well into this game's, systems and environments and things like that. So, but
yeah, no, and that does kind of work because I mean, like if you think of the original Resident Evil games, especially 1, 2, and 3, it's generally pretty darn realistic. I mean, I know you have a little bit over the top kind of monsters, but for the most part, it's like that game comparatively to other things is your character can't just survive anything. It's almost like it comes from a mutation from a virus in a lab and everything like that. It's not like in a sense demonic type stuff like Silent Hill. Everything is pretty grounded. Now things have kind of gotten from 4 and 5. They're definitely ramped up to almost fantasy like levels. But then mixed in with the a very kind of military, like this is, and it makes sense that like this is what Chris would do afterwards. It's like you sign up, Stars is gone, well you go to the next level, which is the BSAA, you know what I mean, and you're going to go around the world pretty much hunting down like terrorist organizations that are doing biomutation and so on like that.
Yep, no, absolutely. Yeah, and the something else I found like super interesting was like how, like why I guess the game like took place in Africa, because like I did some research like after we played it and like looking back in like the Wayback Machine and whatnot to see like what were editors writing about during that era, when it comes to reviews and whatnot. And oh boy, that I can see why now the correlation of this potential Resident Evil 5 remake coming out, in that I don't know if they can remake that game 1-to-1 the way that they built it back in 2009. Like I think they're gonna have to rewrite the game in some sense. But I mean, like ultimately, a lot of like what the conversations were of that time was like, is this racist? Like because you're in Africa as a big white dude, killing black guys and stuff. It's like, but like I also saw a lot of comment too in videos of that era, that were coming out at that time of just like, the developers are coming out and they're just like, it's a video game. Like we're building like. You were just in Spain in the last game. What the hell's the difference?
Yeah, nobody in Spain's been complaining that you went around shooting a bunch of Spanish, Yeah, well, that's the weirdest one. And it's like, I know like the original version that at one point they had, like, it was kind of like, it's going to be like Chris and maybe Barry running around. And they're like, whoa, we got to pump the brakes. We'll put Sheva in there too. So like, we'll make it seem, we'll even it out. And then like, my favorite thing too is that they're like, okay, well, like, we got an answer. It's like, I mean, they are in Africa. I mean, who else you're supposed to be seeing but black people here? Whatever, we'll throw in a bunch of others. So there's like, I like in the first couple of levels, it's like, okay, there's there's the Africans, then there's like some token Europeans, there's like a Mexican there's some Asian people, there you go. But then that all pretty much goes away after like level 4.
yeah
Because they're like, what, here's the thing, the people that are complaining are never going to get that far in the game. Let's be honest.
I can't believe, and we'll get to it, but I cannot believe that they were able to pull off the whole lake mission where you're like in the tribal areas and whatnot, and those guys are carrying around spears and oh my god, dude, you're just blowing them up with fucking grenade launchers and shotguns and shit. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah. It's just like one of those ones where it's like, you know, in the story, of course, it makes it out that like, you know, that's where they've been infected by that flower and whatnot like that, and they're protecting that area. But like, it just seems like Chris and Chev are just like they're at the point where they're just freaked out, so they're shooting everything. It's like it turns out like at the end of the day they get home and be like, dude, what did you guys do? You just shot up villages and towns and everything. You know, one of those moments. Kind of like Billy in like Resident Evil 0, even though it's like he's like, you know, our commander told us to fire on those civilians and I decided not to, but he's the one that's taking the blame for it.
Yeah.
And Rebecca's just never too sure if like he is telling the truth or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. But speaking of Sheva, I can't really like get a beat on that character, but I do appreciate that she was there. It felt like, especially if I were going to play that in a single player experience, it feels like Chris should have all the guns. She should carry all the meds and ammo, you know, like maybe extra stocks of ammo or something like that. And like you had mentioned, you know, like just give her the sniper rifle because she's going to hit headshots every time, you know?
Well, that's the thing is like, because I will say when you play this game with the computer player, it is definitely, you know, on easy and normal, it's not a big deal. But once you start to play on hard and forget about professional with the computer, like I tried doing it a couple times. I'll say even like veteran or whatever, because I think veteran's what the third difficulty is called, the hard one. Even that one, it's like it's almost not worth it because like they'll just get caught on something or whatnot. You know, and yeah, next thing you know, they're down, you know, game over. And it just happens a little too much. But the upside, though, is the fact that, like, you know, you can give them things like the sniper rifle, and they are a dead aim with it. Like, they never miss. So, like, if you give them an upgraded sniper rifle, they are just brutal as backup, which is pretty badass.
Hell yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, no, I thought that she was pretty neat. I'm really surprised that she hasn't been back except for, what'd you say, like was she in Revelations or something like that? Like
Negative. And this has always been kind of my complaint over the years for Resident Evil is that they make great characters and then they're like one and dones, you know, and even some of the main characters barely even come back. You know what I mean? Like, you know, Chris is technically only I guess he's in 4 games in a sense.
Oh.
Right? But, you know, a lot of them aren't in that many games, you know what I mean?
So I'm pretty sure, let me look it up real quick. Yeah, she is. Okay. Okay, that's what I was thinking of then. So the newer horror game, multiplayer game, Dead by Daylight, she's a character in Dead by Daylight.
Oh, did they put her in that? Because I know they did one where there was a Rebecca one. I remember there was one that I think it had Jill and Claire, I think. Maybe not Claire, but I didn't know they put Sheva in there.
Yeah, there's 3 because I remember hearing it in a video after doing some like post game research and whatnot about because it's a common complaint too is that Sheva's not in any other game. Yeah, no, she's a playable character in Dead by Daylight. So. Oh,
that's pretty sweet. That'll be another DLC I'll buy for Dead by Daylight and then never play it because I literally bought the other Resident Evil one or whatnot and then I never got around to ever trying it out. I don't think because I think it's one of those ones like I remember I turned it on. And it's like I have to. It's not like even though I bought the DLC, I can't just go right into the Resident Evil stuff. You have to still do a bunch of other junk to get to it. So it's like I'll come back to this later. But that's actually kind of cool because I do think that Shev is a really cool character. I like her look. I like her design. And just, you know, she's got kind of she's there helping out Chris as Chris's new partner, but she's got kind of an interesting backstory where like she kind of goes through like a lot of crap and is in like guerrilla warfare and all this stuff. It's like brought up and I know they say it in some of the little like Resident Evil books and some of those files. It's like one of those ones. They actually have some pretty good files in Resident Evil 5, but like they feels like they come so randomly in it. By the time you get there, it's like, oh yeah, and then they're like, shit, we forgot to give you some files along the way. Well, here's like a 15-page file for you all of a sudden to read.
Yep. See, and that's a frustrating thing too. Is like, so I'm just gonna come out the gate and say it. I really like what happens in Resident Evil 5 in terms of like story and whatnot. I've watched the videos, I've read the, you know, wiki and whatnot. I still don't quite grasp like really what's going on because the game is so action heavy based. It's just like go, you know, like and in those situations where those notes do appear, it's like I like open it and I get through a couple pages and then I hear your character move, you know, like your character, and I'm like, well, fuck, I don't want him to wait for me to read through it, you know. So like, throw it down. So I'm really curious to see like how many people actually fully grasp and understand, you know, like what Resident Evil 5 is all about, with it, you know, the plot and the lore and everything of the, you know, especially the progenitor virus, like where this all comes from, you know. So
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing is I think Resident Evil 5 actually has a really deep story in it, but it is that one that it literally kind of goes over your head, because the core thing you generally take away from, especially in just like, you know, a general playthrough, is that Chris is getting revenge on Wesker and stopping him from pretty much trying to kill Jill. Like that. That's the bare bones basic story. It's a revenge story. Chris is going for revenge because Jill and like. There's a previous DLC, but the previous story shows some flashbacks in it that him and Jill go to another Spencer mansion that he's got, I think in Europe or something like that. And he built it practically the same looking way too. Yeah. And in that process, you know, they find Wesker, have a scuffle, and then Jill goes to save Chris and flies out of a window. And so from this point on, Chris assumes that Jill's dead, and so he's kind of out here in Africa working for the BSAA, you know, stopping some bioterrorism. But what he really is trying to do is, you know, find and hunt down Wesker.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Because the way that the story like unveils itself, like it's pretty cutscene heavy at the start. Pretty much every chapter has a cutscene or two, you know. But I mean, like once you get into the action of any one chapter, it's like I said, it's just like. And it's not a bad thing. Like I'm not complaining at all. I'm just explaining the way that it is. But like it's just very much like a narrow funnel down to like, you know, a corridor, push into this area, large open room with, you know, waist high fucking objects to hide behind and whatnot. You're in an encounter again, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Resident Evil 4 had that too, you know, to its credit. But it's just it's interesting the way it was built. So,
well, and I will say both Resident Evil 4 and 5, of course, I really like those games, but like the stories to me, they do not sit ingrained like Resident Evil 0 through Code Veronica do. No matter what, like the stories will never compare to those first 5. But you know, it's like the gameplay I think is where it kind of takes over, and that's what keeps you sort of going there and so on. Like, and it's got enough stuff that's interesting to keep you going. Like, okay, but you know, here's something transforms, mutates, whatever, kill it, go to the next thing. You know, you got enough like core stuff holding you together. You know, but yeah, I mean, maybe it's also that. I feel like even as the viruses have kind of gone on, I don't think they're nearly as interesting as they once were, you know?
No.
It's the thing is it's not the same as the TNG virus, like, you know, and just the, you know, those kind of stuff there. That's even the same way I feel with Resident Evil 4.
The direct correlation of Resident Evil, 4 into 5 and then exonerated in Resident Evil 8. When you find out about Miranda and you find out about, you know, the whole like Spencer situation, how he's like studying under her, and it all happened in Africa, and you know, and like now all these things are starting to come together in my head of like, oh no, there is totally like a totality of a story within Resident Evil. They're not individual stories. So as I'm playing more and more of them and understanding the lore and the characters and the narratives and plots and how everything intermeshes together, there's a lot of weird shit in Resident Evil, don't get me wrong. But like it's all starting to come together, you know. So
yeah, it all starts to come together and so on like that. And yeah, as I said, in 5, it's got something kind of like the Lost Plagueis that from Resident Evil 4, where, you know, they're pretty much kind of like infected. They got to like eat the thing, and then it goes in. And what kind of happens to like these like villages here in Africa is that they're subjected to this, and somehow, some way, it kills like a majority of them. But whoever's left is now kind of like souped up and amped up and overpowered, and they can be kind of mind controlled, just like Resident Evil 4 and so on like that. And that's what makes them that kind of variation of a zombie, you know. And there's even stuff that says that like in like some of those, like I think little pamphlets and whatnot that like it says that it killed like all the children and so on like that because they couldn't handle it, and maybe the majority of the women, because there's really only a couple female like zombies you shoot in this one. Literally, I can only think of like one model off the top of my head, but I know there's at least probably two. It's kind of weird when you think about it like that.
Like I said, it all kind of blends together when you're just popping heads left and right.
Yeah.
But, man, you just said something that made me think of something. I'll think of it again. So, what was that? Anyways, I think one of the interesting cutscenes that's super early on was there's that dude. God, I forgot what's that. It's right in the first level, but it's where you see the guy getting the parasite shoved down his throat or whatever, and then he gets infected and you have to take him out and all that. Like, is that how this virus is like progressed? Is that how they're doing it? Is it through that? Is it through injections? Is it through airborne? Is it through, like those are the questions that are going through my head as we were playing, because like maybe I missed the note, maybe I missed the dialogue option, maybe, like, or whatever. But it's things like that like, I don't think the game does a very good job of like keeping the player engaged with its narrative of like how things are happening, why things are happening, and here's where you're going forward. A lot of it comes full circle by the time you get to the end of the game, for sure. But those first handful of levels, it's very much exactly what you said. It's like Chris is trying to find Jill, or like trying to take revenge for Jill.
Yeah, well, in the game, because the game's kind of so fast-paced, it doesn't leave you that same amount of time that you would kind of browse and carouse like in older Resident Evil games, where you would go and you would search everything and you could talk to each like individual object and so on like that. This one just like, your port is like, is there any ammo in here? Is there any health? Like, you're just breaking boxes and crates looking for stuff, and then maybe looking for some blue BSAA emblems, and then on to the next room.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And then even with that, like, like boiling back down to like gameplay mechanics and whatnot, I really enjoyed the franticness of, because like, if you look at this as horror or not is kind of subjective, but like that moment where you have 5 zombies in front of you, you're down to 1 bullet, your teammate doesn't have any ammo to give you, and you're sprinting around that zone, that level, trying to come up with something. We were in that situation multiple times where it was like, well, can't do anything, I ain't got ammo. So
you've spent already, you know what I mean? And that does happen. It's not like you're overloaded with ammo or anything like that. Like, sometimes you start running out of stuff and you're like, okay, got my knife, and I guess we keep searching, and hopefully one of these zombies will drop some ammo. Maybe this dog will drop ammo. Yeah, no, and it's just, I don't know, like that was one thing that I noticed. A little bit later in the game, like that one boss fight where we're up on top of the roofs or whatever, and all those tentacles are flying down at us and all that, and like we're just out of ammo, and we're just like, well, what do we do? And there's all these little blobs on the ground that we keep killing, but they're dropping the wrong shit for us. It's just like, God. Yep, yeah. Whatever this Estella battle, I think, is what that is. That's what she turns into. Yeah. And it's like okay, it's not giving us any of the ammo we need, but at least I guess it will eventually come out at some point. But there's also that. It's also the same thing when you play like with 2 players. Is if you start both taking a bunch of different weapons, then like the game starts dropping all kinds of ammo that you might not need. Sometimes it's almost best to both have the same like 2 weapons, and then that's the only kind of ammo it's generally going to drop off.
Yep.
Yeah, once in a blue moon, you'll find sniper ammo or something like that you might not need. But for the most part, you're just going to find what you need, and that's it.
Yeah, and because that was the other thing that I noted too, because of a handful of the resets that we had to go through, whether it be technical error or just dying. But there are very static locations of items in boxes that I noticed. But on the other end, I've also hit the same box twice over, and like it's a different item, or the RNG nature of enemy drops and whatnot too. So you never really know like what you're gonna get. But there was a handful of locations based off reset points that we had to do, where every time I walked up to that box, a box of handgun ammo dropped, or a box of shotgun ammo, or whatever, like whatever the item actually was. So I'm curious to see like, what does the wireframe encoding of that look like? Like how was it properly created? for the player, and especially with like dynamic difficulty scaling. Beings that Resident Evil 4 had that, but this one didn't. I'd be really curious to see like what was the reasoning behind that, to go back to a traditional choose your difficulty,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it would be kind of interesting to see how that goes. I mean, I know that some of those ones, it's probably like certain ones are like, okay, this is always going to be handgun, this is always going to be sniper rifle ammo. Then there's other ones going to be probably based upon like, well, what guns do you have in your inventory or between both characters, and that's what that's going to be. So it's not going to give you Magnum ammo if you didn't have Magnum, and it's not going to get, well, you probably won't just find Magnum ammo randomly. It's probably preset. But like, I mean, if nobody was carrying the submachine gun, you're not just going to be finding machine gun ammo in there all the time, and you'd be like, dude, I don't need this.
Right.
It's pretty good about giving you what you at least need.
Yeah. Yep. No, I very much agree. Yeah. The other interesting one was the amount of grenades. I had grenades in my inventory majority of our playthrough and just never used them. And I can't really tell if that's like because the way that the inventory system works with the hotkey, on your D-pad for up, down, left, right, or whatever, it's like, because there's diagonal spaces in there, like why not just make it 8 omnidirectional at that point? Yeah, I don't know, because like majority of the time, like my grenades would be in one of those like diagonal slot points or whatever.
Yeah,
it would force me to pause, open my inventory, equip the thing, and meanwhile I'm getting attacked, and you're running around, and things are still happening. So again, is it a bad thing? Not really, but there's some quality for the remake. There's some quality of life things that can happen.
Well, I also loved how like we were like a handful of levels in before like it's like you realize that we could use the D-pad to change guns. You're like, man, I've been changing it with Y this entire time, or triangle.
Yeah. Just like quick flopping through all the weapons and stuff. Yeah. No, I definitely I learned a lot, playing that game, over time and whatnot. So, but
well, and that's still that kind of era where like they start doing those like you have to go into your menu like in gameplay kind of stuff, which I can think of games early on that of course Diablo does that, except for Diablo's the thing, it's like as long as you don't move from that screen, nothing's ever going to come at you right from there,
right.
But I remember Castlevania Lament of Innocence, that was one of the first games I ever got where it's like, oh, I have to go in the menu while the game's still rolling. You know what I mean? And I remember at first I really did not like that. I mean, by this point I still kind of, if I had to choose, I definitely would rather just have let me just have the pause menu. But
sure.
In Resident Evil 5, it's still not too bad because it's still pretty quick. I mean, the only thing you're probably not going to be doing while you're frantic or anything like that is like exchanging ammo or something like that. But for the most part, if you need to switch to another gun, you can do it pretty jiffy on the spot, even if you do go through the menu because you have the gun stuck to the diagonal section.
Right. Yep. So what did you think of? Okay, so you played the game a million times over. Obviously, or at least I think, anyways, this was your first time on PC, correct?
Yeah, this was the first version because I bought that. They had it was like a year ago or something like that. They had like a humble bundle and it was like $20 for every single Resident Evil game on PC. Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. And it's one of those ones like, I could always use another copy. And as I said, this is one of those games that I have on 360. I bought the collector's edition back in the day, so I got the Steelbook version. It came in a big box. It came with a making of DVD, which was pretty cool. I remember I had one of those cases though that was like one of those like early days steel books where like you felt like you're gonna crack the disc every single time you pulled it out of there because it was so like locked in.
Right.
You just watch the disc just bending up. You're like, oh god, here we go. And I remember the Resident Evil Collector's Edition came with some weird stuff. Like it came with it came with some cool stuff. Like it came with this like tri-cell, like kind of like messenger bag that you could have. And I remember I used that forever and stuff. And then you got like in Africa, like the continent pendant.
Mm-hmm.
So you put your Rastafarian hat on and everything like that. And look like you're going back to like the motherland.
God, dude.
It came with a little crisp like action. It was like because it was like those early days when they started making like big collector's editions when they started charging for them too, I guess, because only a handful of years ago they didn't charge for that kind of stuff. But Yeah, I just remember it came up with like all sorts of weird stuff in there and so on, but it was kind of cool. It was like one of those ones I was like, that's Resident Evil 5, I gotta get it, and so on like
Yeah.
that. But
What do you think of any of the core differences? I mean,
so far,
like one of the first things that you noticed that I remember very distinctly is like, oh, my controls are fucked up because I can strafe.
oh yeah, well, and that wasn't necessarily a PC one. That was always in the game, to tell you the truth. Because I initially, when I first got Resident Evil 5, I was like, what the heck? This isn't Resident Evil 4 controls. So I switched them back. And so there's two types of controls they got going on in this game. I think there's probably three if you really look in the menu. So you could have just standard Resident Evil 4 controls, which is what I always kind of like for it. Or they kind of implement a little bit of like, okay, we got a little bit of modern controls where like instead of I think you hold, like L2 to aim, R2 to shoot, and then you have you can strafe, which is kind of weird in Resident Evil. Can you strafe while aiming, or is it only while walking?
No, you're still stationary when you pull up the gun. So.
Yeah, and so they had a couple of those, so I just wanted to go old school. It's weird because I can play Resident Evil 6 has a different control scheme where it's a very fluid one, but yeah, in Resident Evil 5, I feel it's too similar to 4 that I like. I'd rather have the controls be the simple, give me my tank controls, give me just my, easy aiming and so on like that. The other differences, I do kind of notice is like in the PC version, you got more options for turning up pretty much the settings on there. You got some anti-aliasing, of course you can change your resolution and all kinds of stuff to make it run better and so on, which is kind of cool because of course on the other versions you don't technically have that. I do remember when I got that PS4 version though, after having the 360 one, that was like one of those ones where like it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, man, this game looks so smooth on here, because probably instead of running 720 by 30, if I had to guess, is what the 360 was going with, give or take. That PlayStation one, we're just getting the PS4 one. It's like, 1080 by 60 and just watching it just like buttery smooth and just looking crystal clear. And it is that one, I'll say, even like just playing the game, we're playing on PC in 2025 and the game still really holds up strong. Like it still looks good. It doesn't really, for being a game that's, sounds so weird to say it, but like it's what, 16 years old?
16 years.
Yeah, 16 years old. Yeah, it's like one of those ones that doesn't feel that old. I mean, granted, that's kind of how the last couple generations have been. It's like it's all like the minor little stuff that's like improved. That's kind of like you don't notice it at first, but like it's all there working in the background, But yeah, the graphics look great. The character models are still strong, And I will say the 360 PS3 era was that period where like you started to get like really good cinematic games continuously. That was once again Halo, Gears of War, of course Metal Gear Solid was always doing it, but like you have MGS4 at that time period. There's just in all the Call of Duty games then, like they all had that, like it was like in a sense, you're gonna have a story and cutscenes that are better than any movie you're gonna go out and see. Like that's pretty much when video games kind of started to be like they've taken over by this point.
Oh yeah, yep. No, I fully agree. In terms of graphics, the one thing that I noticed, and I called it out pretty early on, and it really was like an eyesore for the majority of the game, is that, so I'm playing in 1440p, native resolution, it doesn't scale to ultra wide, which is probably good, so it stays by 16 by 9, so it cuts off the corners of my screen, basically. But if 1440p, I'm running like solid 175 frames, if like V-synced it to that or whatever. But the problem is that objects in the distance to semi-near view, so I'd say like probably 10 feet out or more, very much feel like on a 1440 display, very much feel like a 720p image because they are kind of blurry, downgraded in terms of texture quality and whatnot. Things that are closer are more in line with what I would imagine is probably closer to like a 1080p style image or whatever. But the fucking character models are like 8K, dude. Like they are insanely detailed and do not mix well with that world. But
you know what sounds weird is Resident Evil has these filters you can unlock, and I think that there's one that's like I think you have to be like professional or something stupid to get it. But like I bet you, because I think one of them's like a grain filter, kind of gives you a cinema grain, that might like just overlay just enough to kind of meld it all together. I feel that might be that one place where that comes in handy.
yeah, no, because it was pretty jarring. Like having Chris. Because I played as Chris this entire playthrough, Spencer played as Sheva, but like having Chris like up against like a brick wall, for example, and like you can tell enough, you can see the mortar, you can see the individual bricks, you can see the like there might be a crack in one or whatever, but comparatively to Chris's face and just gigantic pecs and shoulders and shit, like dude, it's like oh my god, I literally feel like I'm. Like Chris is in 2025, whereas that game's in 2009. Like that's literally what it feels like, So.
Well, that's always the weirdest part, just because it's like the character models are always the ones that can be upscaled like infinity almost. Where like everything else it has like almost like in a sense a pre-rendered of the time. And that's why like you can even see PlayStation 1 games where like the character models, like especially like perfect examples. You take like, let's just say you take Resident Evil and you put it like in DuckStation, and then you up the resolution in there and everything like that, and all of a sudden there's some games you're like, oh, those characters actually have faces and like highly detailed on them and so on. You just never could see it because you're looking at 320 for so long, right. And the pixels block all those extra details, but it's like, oh no, they drew all that stuff, they created it all to be like that, right. And it's that thing I always think about with like, they say with the Final Fantasy games with all the pre-rendered backgrounds and so on in like 7, 8, and 9. And the bummer really is that like when they went to make like, the remasters of them and everything like that, is that, you can make all the polygons and all that stuff. You can upscale those and everything like that. But the downfall is they deleted all the original files of the pre-rendered stuff back in the day to save, because, it's like that one, it's terrible. I do kind of get it, because you're like back in the day when hard drives were just not nearly as big as they once were. But like, you hate to start saying it's like you should have known. Like, okay, you're on Final Fantasy VII by this point. It's obviously a big deal. You know what I mean? Right. It's not just if that was Final Fantasy 1 was number 7, I could kind of get it. Be like, well, we don't know about this. You know what I mean? We've never done this before, and so but by 7 you sort of already knew. By 8 and 9, obviously those are some of the biggest games known to mankind. It's a bummer that they did that without the foresight to kind of be like, hey, what about remaking these? Which is strange, because once again, it's not like remakes were unheard of. They literally had the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo was out, they started remaking games right away. It's once again not a strange concept by this point, but it's a bummer. I always think about that. I'm not too sure what happened to the Resident Evil one. If I had to guess, they probably did the same thing to Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3. I bet you nobody kept their core assets.
Probably not. I wouldn't imagine so.
There probably wasn't budget in there for that and so on, and especially back once again in the 90s. Even though video games are starting to make a lot of money, at first it's not like there's still copious amount of money flying around just to be like adding in new PC stuff all the time and so on.
Right. Yep. Yeah, but I'd say in general, the PC port of this game is very solid. I was actually very, very surprised that, here we are 16 years later, I can just boot the game through Steam, invite you to my game, and we play. And it's like, and it just worked. Granted, we had the couple drop-offs here and there or whatever, but I don't know if that's a game problem, if it's, we're both on Starlink, is that a connection issue problem? Was it Steam? Was it, it could be so many things. Probably is the game in my opinion, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm only going to throw that out there because I don't think I ever could notice that with 360 back in those days. I know I played it online here and there, but it wasn't like common because I didn't have just internet easily. That was the time period where like you had to take your system to somebody else's house when you wanted to go download DLC. And it was a very magical moment. And you felt like while you're there, you might as well get a handful of games because this is not common. But I remember but the other times I played Resident Evil online, I don't remember ever having too much issues. with like the PlayStation 4 version or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I almost do think it might have been a minor PC thing, and I'm giving it a little bit of a pass because, there's more components working on like a PC. There's your PC, that's not just like a console where they're all the same.
Yeah, yeah. But like I said, I mean, literally impressive. Here we are, 16 years later, Capcom still has the servers on. That blew my mind because like I had no idea, like that work or not. Yeah, good on them for that.
And I will say that every time I went to load up into your game, I always saw like 3 or 4 other people's games running.
Oh yeah.
So it's not like me and you are the only ones on there, because we all know there's a lot of those games you jump on there and you can sit there for a good half an hour and you might not ever see anybody. And the fact that I saw completely different people every single time I turned it on is something kind of impressive.
Oh yeah, yeah, and even when I played briefly before we decided to do a full co-op playthrough, I had played that first level, on my own in solo or whatever. Had no idea that I was online, and just some random dude just like joined my game, and it was like, cool, I guess I'm gonna play with, and we ran through that first level, Yeah, I mean, again, just the fact that a game that old still has servers online is just kind of a testament, like good on Capcom for doing that.
Yeah, and I do kind of hope we're at that point too, where in a sense servers won't really go away for any of these games, hopefully in the not like they used to and so on like that, and they'll just be like continuously kept up and so on like that.
And even if they decide to kill servers, just allow peer-to-peer at the bare minimum, allow that, or allow me to set up my own virtual server or something, and I mean, it's a bigger topic than just Resident Evil, but I think the industry as a whole, in terms of game preservation, is failing pretty visibly right now. You can imagine the amount of games that are online only that you'll just never be able to play ever again.
Nope, that'll be stuck. See, at least Resident Evil 5, as long as pretty much all about all the versions. I don't think there's anyone out there it's not. It does give you a lot of options though, because if you don't want to play online, it has split screen. You know what I mean? So like at least that will always carry it no matter what. And then you can also hook up. I'm assuming you could probably do this with the other systems, but I know it was a big deal back in the day. It was like, you could hook up your Xbox to 360 to Xbox 360. And I remember me and RJ did that and played through Resident Evil 5 that way. And that was like, this is cool right here. We're doing a little LAN system with Resident Evil 5. Like, well, I never thought about that.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say. I lost my train of thought. My bad.
Well, it's just interesting too, because I was saying about I'm like, when I first got this game, I was still playing it on a CRT TV. Like that's kind of like the era it still was, because it wasn't until Mass Effect 2 that it made me feel like, I can't use a CRT TV because they made the text too small. That was the problem with that game, and that was like, okay. And then of course, lo and behold, somebody was throwing out a CRT TV on the side of the road. It's like, or a flat screen TV. I'm like, perfect. This solves all my Xbox issues.
There you go.
But I think about that, and then the other thing I think about is this was also like the one and only game that I remember I picked up at midnight on release, and I literally came home and played this game all the way till the sun rose until I beat it. Like, I've never done that on anything else before. And went through the entire thing. And the campaign's not ridiculously long. It's probably give or take 8 to 10 hours depending on still kind of blows me away that I was able to beat it like that, but I did. Who knows? It might have been like 10 o'clock by the time I was finally done with it in the morning. Sure. But it's got a lot there. But really what makes it great, though, is the fact that it has such replayability, because not only do you have all the unlockables, you can always collect treasure. If you want, you get the BSAA emblems, which are like next to impossible to find them all unless you just happen to get lucky, or you use a guide. I feel like that's how pretty much most people, if anybody generally has all whatever 20 or whatever it is of them, I'm pretty sure that's kind of it, But yeah, there's just so much just little variables that kind of go into it that you can just keep playing it over and over, and I think that's what makes it so much fun.
You just triggered a thought in my head about treasure. So it was probably a couple missions into the game where it's finally time to start upgrading weapons or buying new weapons or whatever, you know, like, so we're finally on those screens. So in between missions, you go to this like post screen type thing or whatever to re-gear to, you know, go to your next mission or whatever. And it was at that point that I'm like looking at my treasures with the RE4 mindset of like, where's the crown for these gems to slot in? Where's the thing, you know, to combine, you know, because like you take, you know, one gem's worth 8,000 on its own, but if I throw it into this other thing, it's worth 20 grand, you know, or whatever. So I was like expecting that. I'm really curious why they got rid of that system in this game.
Yeah, well, a lot of the choices I think in 5 were to streamline the experience, you know, and that's for, you could say for good or bad, you know what I mean? I think by streamlining it, they want to make it very smooth for the 2-player, I think, version, you know what I mean? And I think that's what they want. Like, they want you to collect treasure, but we don't need you to like go out of your way to like be like, oh, I'm missing like some stones to go in the cat's eye or something like that. Right, I do kind of wish they had that in there. That would just add a little bit of fun. I mean, it's one of those ones like none of that stuff really breaks it for me. I'm like, I could kind of, no. I don't care too much either way. It's not that big of a deal, but I do kind of like that. That was sort of a neat thing in 4 that kind of made it feel special. Like, aha, I got all the pieces I need here. Look at me now, high roller.
Well, and imagine if they just like if they rebalance the game in terms of like what weapons you can get at what times and whatnot. So it makes it worthwhile to like if I hang on to these 3 gems because I know that there's an item later that I can slot these into to get the most amount of money out of it because the Magnum's coming up or because the sniper rifle, the PSG one, whatever, you know, like something big is coming, you know, like they could have spun it that way to make it more viable or whatever. And again, I am absolutely nitpicking here. There's nothing wrong with the way that it is, you know, but it's just like it's correlations from the previous series game or the previous games in the series to this and just trying to come up with like rhymes or reason. And I think you nailed it on the head is to streamline the experience. And that's very much what I feel about Resident Evil 5 in general is that it's a very streamlined, fast-paced action in your face. Let's do this, you know, quick time event, but you know, like all this type of stuff. But yeah, it's extremely fun though. Extremely fun game.
Well, and I can't remember if we brought this up on the Dino Crisis podcast. I felt like I've said it a handful of times, but people do also kind of forget that they're towards the end of that Resident Evil, the original series cycle, like in the early 2000s with Code Veronica and all that stuff. There was a lot of people that just hated survival horrors by that point. Hated it. And I always refer to, there was that X-Play episode where they gave Code Veronica a 1 out of 5, you know, and I always, it always stood out to me. I mean, they hated it so much they made a skit about how much they hated it. And it was like, in a sense, it's like, you know, when you look at that, that's kind of goes to show that there was a lot of people out there like that. They kind of had that same vibe. They were getting kind of tired of the survival horrors and so on. Because that's that thing that I think in hindsight people kind of forget about that, and that's why people go like, "Oh, I can't believe you know, like I don't get Resident Evil, you know, 5 and 6 and all these ones like that." And you go, from Capcom's point of view, they're going there was this big decline kind of happening. That was like Resident Evil 0 didn't sell a whole lot. Granted, I know it was stuck on the GameCube, so you know, I mean that was cool for me and people that were really into Nintendo. But I do get it. Probably as a whole, that was probably a little bit tougher sell for them there. But it's like 0 didn't do the greatest. Even the remake did it did good, but not as good as they were kind of hoping. You know, and you know, Code Veronica did great on the Dreamcast for what the Dreamcast was. Decent on the PS2, but it just kind of dipped still, and you know there was just certain people that were just kind of over it by then, you know. And it's weird, just like between Code Veronica coming out on the Dreamcast and just a couple years later and like some of its re-releases, there was quite a change in gaming from then. So like Code Veronica, I know when it was re-released as Code Veronica X, did seem a little bit archaic, I guess, to some people, like as an X-Play, but it's one of those ones, like it's the same thing with Final Fantasy. It's like, you know, people also forget there was a time period where people really hated that turn-based stuff. They could not figure out why their characters just stood there. Be like, if it was me, I would just run up and just start punching the guy. I don't know why he's just standing there. And lo and behold, they changed that eventually. You know what I mean? Like, because they listened to that guy who probably never bought a Final Fantasy game in his entire life. Let's be honest. You know, exactly. He just wanted to bitch and complain about the game. You know, but that's the same thing, and that's kind of how Resident Evil evolved into what I always call, because I always say there's about 3 different series of Resident Evil. There's the original series that ends with Code Veronica or 0, depending on how you look at it, just release window. Then there's 4, 5, 6, Revelations 1 and 2, which I kind of call like the somewhat action series, even though I will say Revelations 1 and 2 is a lot more classic than the other one, than 4, 5, and 6. And then I feel there's the modern series, which is 7 and 8.
Yeah, which is very just. I see, like seven to me absolutely was like a return to form, but not in the sense of what people think is a return to form. Like it's very just straight up horror. That game is a horror game,
Yeah.
Whereas 8 more felt like, okay, we want horror, but we want to add in the action. It's a repeat of 4, basically,
Yeah.
Whereas I think that out of all the Resident Evil games I've ever played, 4 is probably the one that rings best with me, because it does have a lot of the survival horror stuff from previous, is starting to kickstart the action side of Resident Evil. I think by the time that, now that we're into 5 and we're playing through 5, I think 5 is like the perfect happy medium for the action based, Resident Evil game. Whereas my brief experience that I've had in 6 is just way too over the top. Like it's so far go, like going or whatever. Still a fun game, but subjectively, like in terms of Resident Evil, I think that 4 just kind of lands in like that sweet spot, and 5 is like a close second, in terms of like the action to horror ratio or whatever. So.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, and realistically, I will say, like, if you play deeper into 6 is kind of in about the similar ballpark of 5. It just does some things a little bit differently in that one. Like my only like light complaint to 6, realistically, is they get rid of the upgrade system, and it's like they go for a perk system, and perk system to me is such a. It's not nearly as good. That's fine for multiplayer. Yeah, it's great for multiplayer, like a perk system, and that's literally because then Call of Duty took it over, and so that's people started doing that. But the thing is this is the problem with a perk system. That's what always kind of bothers me, is that certain items are just better than other stuff. So why would I, even though the other one might be good for this one level, but because it's only really good for one level, I'm probably not going to care any change to it. Just give me the best damage, best defense, best health, whatever. Like that's all I need. Right. I'm not going to take anything else, and so on. But no, Resident Evil 6 does add quite a bit in there, and it's a humongous game too. Like that's something that people don't give it credit for. But like it's literally like 4 games in one almost. Maybe not exactly that, but each campaign is quite long.
Yeah. Yeah, and I very much like. I hope we get to that game eventually too, because I would love to co-op through that game too.
Yeah, and that's another one too. Is I think a lot of people, if they play Resident Evil 6 single player, they get kind of like an experience. But you play it co-op, and you're like, holy crap, is this game fantastic? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I will say as time has gone on, I don't think it holds up maybe the same way that Resident Evil 5 does, because Resident Evil 5 is like you go back to that, it doesn't matter how many times I keep going back to it, it's just as great as I remember it. I have just as much fun. All the moments are they're excellent and so on like that. Even the stuff, it's like, they got one of those on rails shooting modes, which I felt like every game at this point, there's always that scene where get on the turret, and then you start blasting things. And in this one here, you get on the Jeep and you're blasting guys on motorcycles and so on like that. And then you get the El Gigante battle towards the end, which is, it's another one of those ones that if you play that like on veteran and above, like that battle can be almost. Yeah, because it's those weird moments in games where like the gameplay shifts, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, and now like okay, now it's a completely different game. It's like I always feel those moments should be the kind where it's like they're there, they should just be fun. Don't make them too ridiculous, because that's not the main game you're playing. That's just a special bonus thing. I always think of, like, speaking of Shinji Mikami, is in. When you beat, I believe it's the very first Devil May Cry. It could be Devil May Cry 2, but I'm pretty sure it's Devil May Cry 1. I remember at the very end of that game, it's like already a tough as nails game and so on like that. And the very end, they want you to fly a plane on the way out there. You're like, you want me to fly a plane now? Like, what? It's like, I don't want to do this. Like, and then at least it wasn't that big of a deal. But I was so like, after all that you just put me through, you're gonna have me fly a plane? Like, never done this once in the entire game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Yeah, trying to think of like really outstanding moments in Resident Evil 5. Like I said, unfortunately, a lot of that experience kind of blends, in my mind. It feels like, especially like the running on the ground levels, like where you're just going village to village or like, section to section or whatever. But the really big standout ones were like, I love the turret section on the train, with the boss fight and all that with the tentacles and stuff, and you're breaking all those and whatnot. That one was super fun. I'm trying to think of others, like even the final, towards the end of the game, like the Wesker fight with the rocket launcher and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he's catching rockets, you're shooting them out of his hand. It's so ridiculous, but like, oh, dude, it's just so much fun.
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you think your...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, what's probably one of your favorite levels?
I honestly like. I really like that village section with the tribal guys and whatnot on the lake.
Yep. The kind of like the
cool.
bayou section.
You're traveling around on that boat and stuff. Like going section to section. Again, it's ripped directly out of the heart of Resident Evil 4, but like they did it well. In my opinion, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, no, that's always probably been my favorite level because there's a lot of cool stuff. I like just like the tribal stuff because you just don't really know what's coming on each time. You're facing a lot of new enemies and you're kind of like, that almost gives you a lot of Resident Evil vibes because you're out here in this mysterious area. You can travel around so you can find different treasure and so on like that. Go to each different location and in each one there's new enemies. And, you get those really tall guys that come on out. They're like 10 feet tall and they're swinging the big old bone like axes at you. The ones who are like, oh, or whatever the heck they're doing, and so you're battling all those guys, and then there's the crocodiles in there, which if that is one of those ones, like, it's like, that will get you is the crocodile, like where you're like, holy shit, it's a crocodile coming out of the water, and so on like that. And it is one of those ones where there's only a few. Oddly enough, enemy-wise, there's only a few kind of animals. Of course, you get dogs, and you get those crocodiles, even though I think they're just normal crocodiles. I don't think they're anything affected, but they are still super scary. And it's something I've always really would like to see more of because Resident Evil 1's really good about having a lot of animal characters you fight, especially in the fact that it's the first game. You fight a giant snake, you fight dogs, you fight crows, you fight, sharks and everything like that. The bees. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there, and it's weird because you're in Africa, so you feel like there should be more room for like you could have infected lions or something like that. Would be a perfect one. I mean, one that I always go to for like one of the scariest games that I always say it's pretty much a survival horror, even though it never gets classified that, but it's Tomb Raider, because they're especially in that original one when like they still have a lot of like animal creatures. There's one I kind of forgot about till I was replaying through that new version, but you go to flip this switch. The second you turn around, there's a gorilla just standing right behind you. It gets to me every time. It's like, oh God, yeah, just so terrifying. And there's so many moments like that in there where you go into a new room and all of a sudden 2 lions come running at you and you're like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Laura, backflip real quick. We got to get out of here.
Yeah, totally.
And I felt like that's one that's like, I think there's always this weird thing in video games that there's people out there that get sensitive to when you shoot animals in a video game, and I think that's what keeps creators from kind of using them. That's why in Tomb Raider I don't think you see it very much anymore. Like they kind of they keep that sort of away. I mean, they'll throw a couple ones in there. The newer games, you fight a bear, you fight a jaguar, you fight some other things, but not tons of stuff. I feel like it's just that weird thing. You could slaughter like 150 like soldiers, nobody cares. Kill like one endangered animal, that's it.
Yep, exactly. Well, especially with like how like over the top this era of Resident Evil can get. The crazy Wesker backflips and the tight, like leather suits and stuff like that. Like it's very Matrixy. But like, why not? Why not have an infected rhino or an infected giraffe or like something wild like that? And just like imagine, like rhinoceros comes charging up on you and its head splits open and it's got all these teeth and tentacles and shit. And it's like, like, I mean, you could do a lot of cool stuff with stuff like that, and even make it like an on-rail section. That could have been the on-rail section where you're getting chased down by a herd of whatever,
Yeah, you could have like a stampede coming after you and so on like that. Instead of having guys on motorcycles, which seems more, in my opinion, more out of place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's just like some minor stuff that I feel they can do. And as I said, that's been kind of an issue ever since the first one, is that like they've kind of strayed away from a lot of that. And as I said, a lot of games have. Tomb Raider even falls in that same thing too, where all of a sudden for like the next couple of games, you're like, why am I shooting people all the time? Like, I don't want to shoot people. Let's go back to the old school where like it's just, I think that when you fight like the kind of like the man versus like nature type stuff, I think is much more scary than man versus man. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And there's just something cool about that, and it's oddly you don't even get that too often. But it's weird because I do feel 5 was almost the perfect place for it, and it's kind of totally underused, other than those crocodiles,
So these are things like when we were talking earlier about like there's a lot of rumor out in the world right now that Resident Evil 5 is getting a remake, and I think that similar with, that we had a conversation about Dino Crisis and like, what does the Dino Crisis remake look like and whatnot. I think you just give it the full treatment like RE2, 3, and 4 got,
Yeah.
Maybe rewrite some things, change some pacing things and whatnot. But I totally think that you could absolutely bring horror back into this game and do it well without diminishing like what the original game really was, So I think there's a lot of room for rewriting and growth within this game, and I would really like to see it because they could very simply just go into that game, update all the textures of 4K, call it a day, because it still is a good game. It doesn't need a remake, but if they're gonna do it, go all out. That's kind of my opinion about it.
I do think so, because you could go in there. I mean, I know like one of the big things is they wanted to make daytime seem scary, and it does kind of work because the game for the most part is at the daytime, except for that part where you're like in the caverns carrying around that lantern, and things like that. But really what you would do is you could just take the Resident Evil 5, like the core like plot and storyline, and just slow everything down a little bit and make it kind of have that. I mean, that's kind of what Resident Evil 2 Remake sort of does, is it slows everything down a bit. And by doing that, it really makes things feel a lot more scary when you find things. Because just you could have those same enemies, but like you just see a little bit less of them. But when you do, it's a big deal kind of thing. Definitely you could go. You could change it up a bit and really work that. But is it really necessary? Gosh, once again, 16 years later, this game holds up stronger than most games do nowadays. So I don't know what this, to say there. But
at this point, I would rather see I would much rather see Code Veronica or Zero be remade. Probably Code Veronica out of those two.
Yeah, and Code Veronica seems like the most or the main candidate for a remake. I feel is Code Veronica more than anything else, because I feel like they would save one for the total last one. I have a feeling that like when they remake 1, they want to be as dialed in on that RE engine as much as possible, and then they'll do 1 again. 0 is I feel like that one's kind of a long shot, because even though that game's kind of a major one still, once again that the 0, well, I was gonna say remake of the N64 one that never came out, but that one still holds up extremely well too, for that style that, you could definitely, all you're really doing is changing camera angle so that you could have an over the shoulder thing. Not saying that you couldn't, but like where Code Veronica could really, that is like a, pretty big jump, if you took that game from its Dreamcast era and then, really brought it into like the new, over the shoulder style and everything like that. That one could benefit, I think, the most from it, and I think that one's just a bigger game in general because that's the true Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil Nemesis only has a 3 because PlayStation had a contract. That's the only reason why it is. So I think it would be Code Veronica would be the next remake. It's one of those. It would surprise me if they did 5, because if they did 5, then I really would feel like 6 next then. Like, you know what I mean? Like
yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't really know. everything is pointing towards a 5 remake, though.
Yeah.
We'll see what Capcom does, and I think what's going to be interesting is, do we get the RE9 announcement, or do we get the RE5 remake, or insert X remake? First. What's going to happen first? Because we're 3 years, 4 years from RE8 so far.
Yeah, it's been a while, and the thing too is that they were dropping games for quite a bit. Like when 2 came out, I think it was only 1 year later or something that 3 came out right behind it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that long, and it seemed like in that time period it felt like it was only 1 year later Resident Evil 8 came out. Like they all kind of sort of came close to like leapfrogging each other. Maybe
I think it was 2, 8, and then 3 came out. So several years after each other, something like that. But yeah, they were all very close in proximity to each other. Yeah,
like I'll say this, it probably was in like at a maximum 5, but I almost feel like it probably a maximum 4 year kind of thing. So I almost have a feeling what's going to happen is they'll make an announcement of a couple of games at once. So it'll be like, it could go in any order, but 9 remake of something, and then maybe another remake of something else, and go from there. I will say going. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna comment on the tail end of 8. I'm really curious to see where they're even going with 9 at this point. I'm hearing, or I've been seeing rumor that it's another Claire Leon campaign. Which what happens to Ethan?
Well, that's like I kind of wondered. Is like, are you gonna finish that Ethan thing? You know what I mean? Because I know that like just like how 5 is, where it's kind of like a wish wash of like people either think it's the greatest Resident Evil or it's one of their least favorite ones. That's kind of how 7 and 8 is too. It's either people really like that one a lot because it's different, or they go, not my Resident Evil. Yeah.
I didn't. I played through both 7 and 8. I much prefer 8 because I think that it.
Yeah.
I don't like the hidey horror style games, so much where but there is combat in 7, but it's not exemplified. It doesn't want you to do combat; it wants you to run. More often than not, and whatnot, and hide and whatnot.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like Resident Evil to me in that sense. It feels like a horror game for sure. Yeah. So I'm just curious where they're going to go with 9.
Well, that's how I've always felt about 7. Is 7 was one of those games where I feel they just put the Resident Evil title on it so they could sell it, but it's one of those games like that should have been in the olden days. That would have just been like, oh, Capcom's doing another survival horror game. Like that's what it should have been. Literally it could have just been the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. Like literally that could have been the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game right there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just call it Broken Bayou and you're good to go. I mean,
yeah. And it's kind of like when I play 8, the way I look at that one is I just picture it like it's modern day Castlevania. If I say that to myself, it's like, oh, this is fantastic. And 8 really is a good playing game. Like that's the one where it's like, is it really kind of Resident Evil? It's kind of a stretch, but it's just a game. Like by a standalone game, it's fantastic. You'll have so much fun of that game. It's so good in that sense, and I feel like that's just kind of how you have to look at those. What I was going to say, though, is going back to 5, there is 2 creatures that is pretty sweet that appear towards the end that I think make for a good standout. And one, you do get the Lickers back again, and that's a big deal because Lickers never appeared in anything other than like Outbreak and maybe something else, but none of the major games had them in it. So you get these Licker kind of version Bs in there, and there's quite a few of them and stuff you get to fight. So that kind of is pretty darn cool. And then they also got the Reavers, which are kind of like a Chimera-like creature, which once again, that's another one that never really appeared. They're a little bit different in this one, and they're definitely kind of a pain in the ass into me because all it takes is one wrong move getting too close to it, and that's it. One hit kill.
Yeah. But there's that one section where it tosses a handful of them at you, and you remember, like, we both looked at our inventory. We're like, "Oh fuck, we have a bunch of proximity mines," and we just laid the entire area out with them.
Yeah, just like bloop 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 bloop. And they just walk right. You gotta love the proximity mines. It's like there's something special about that. Just watching those enemies walk straight into them. But yeah, I know there is those cool enemies like that, which I think is kind of neat. Even though they can be kind of a little bit of a pain in the ass. They are pretty cool that they brought, in a sense, those back in just little slightly different variations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They kind of remind me of you remember the bugs from Halo 3?
Yeah.
Like the early portion of the game. I forgot what they call them. They're drones or whatever they call them. They look pretty similar. They don't operate the same way or anything like that. But just like visually, like just that bug like exoskeleton style creature. And I do like their mechanics. I do like that you have to kind of like break them down to an extent to where they start to show sections of their body that are like soft points or whatever, and then take them out from there. So yeah, super cool design. I thought that those were fun to fight.
Yeah, and the kind of cool part is that's you find them once you kind of come to about the lab portion of the game, which I will say we didn't really mention this, but like story wise, you do come in there and you realize there's this company called Tricell or whatever, and what Tricell really is just like a cover name, well, for like the in a sense umbrella being out there in Africa the whole time, So you do kind of find some like umbrella and classicness out there. So there is a lot more lead back. I will say like Resident Evil 5 leads more into like old school Resident Evil than technically Resident Evil 4 does. Where Resident Evil 4 almost just feels like it's just Leon's there, but beyond that, and Ada's there, and Wesker, but beyond that, for the most part, it's almost like they're on a completely different adventure, where this one does kind of bring it back around a lot more.
Yep. Yeah. I'm actually kind of curious because they're the one. So unfortunately for the audience, as we were playing through, we had a couple technical difficulties where I was host, Spencer was connecting to my lobby, and we would get to the end of a level, and I would complete the level, I would get the achievement, but Spencer would just drop out and back to the menu and get all that stuff. So there's a couple different missions. One of them being that cave mission that you were talking about, where one of us has to hold the flashlight and the other doesn't. But I'm actually looking forward to replaying that because there's a couple of things like within that level that I want to test, and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it should be interesting to go back and do all that. Yeah, and then as you have mentioned too, like we still haven't touched Mercenaries. So I know that there's a ton of content there that I haven't experienced yet. Plus all of the unlockables, upgrading all the weapons, unlocking all that type of stuff. Plus outfits. I've seen the outfit list, but I haven't unlocked any of them yet. There's some really funny ones in there.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the game is there's so much bonus. Because that's the thing is a lot of times, I'll say this, if you compare Resident Evil 5 to 4 and you're just comparing the straight campaign, especially if you're just comparing it as a single player game, hands down Resident Evil 4 is definitely going to take the cake on that. But once you start adding up the other stuff, that Resident Evil 5 has the co-op mode in it, that Resident Evil 5 has the best Mercenaries mode out of any Resident Evil game ever made. I mean, it's got like a wide variety of missions to do, tons of characters to choose, and then they do different variations. Like you can play co-op Mercenaries. You can play competitive Mercenaries, where like you each go for the highest score. You can also play, there's also like a versus mode Mercenaries, where you can actually shoot it. There's 4 people playing, and you can actually shoot at each other, and the zombies and stuff happen to just be kind of in the way, Right. So it's got there's a 4th mode too that's kind of like just another spin on that, but so it's got so much stuff there, and then there's also 2 other DLC missions. One of them is really cool. One of them's Lost in Nightmares, and that was the one I was telling you about. I'm like, well, we probably should have played through that one again, because it's that lead-in story of where Chris and Jill are running the Spencer mansion. They find Wesker and everything like that. But the way that one kind of plays is kind of neat because it gives you a very old school Resident Evil, vibe and feel with like solving riddles, puzzles, reading notes, and all that kind of stuff. But it's all in the Resident Evil 5 engine in a sense. Yeah, so it looks like that. And it's got cool little battles in it and so on like that. And it's not too long, but it's just neat enough. And then I remember the other one you play as Josh, and I can't remember if you play as Josh and Sheva or something like that. I don't remember that other DLC giving a whole lot of like. It felt like I only played it once or twice, but the other one just felt more like it was just like a fun little challenge action romp more than anything else. Yeah. But yeah, it's like that's the thing about this game is like if I add up the whole package of everything that Resident Evil 5 delivers, that's where I always kind of go like. If I want the game that has the most replayability, has the highest fun factor, I can play it with a friend and all that stuff, that's sometimes where I go, Resident Evil 5 is kind of hands down the best choice to go with, you know.
Oh yeah.
I'm not saying it's not my favorite Resident Evil. Of course, I always love the original one most for that. But yeah, as I said, if I want to have a wide variety of stuff to do, all kinds of unlockables and everything like that, it's just like I can't go wrong with Resident Evil 5.
Oh yeah, no, the value proposition of the game is phenomenal. I mean, even in 2025, if you buy that game, I don't remember what it costs full price on Steam, but let's call it $20, 19.99.
I think
easily worth it, easily worth it on its own. You know.
Yeah, full price.
Sales swapping.
Yeah, you know what I mean. God, if you run across something like that Humble Bundle, it made the game like $250 or something like that.
Well, that's how I got. That's how I got all the Resident Evil games.
Yeah, because I think if I break it down, I think that's literally what it was. Because $20 for Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, not the old ones, of course, but whatever, 4, 5, 6. And Revelations 1 and 2. I think it had 7 in there too. Actually, it didn't have 8 because 8 was like an extra $20, and I was like, I own 8 on both Series X and PS4. I don't think I need another copy of it, but
right, yeah,
you know, yeah, just like it's so good. It's just one of those ones, and especially if you got somebody to play it with, that's where the magic really happens. Because I do kind of notice that is the big thing is when you talk to people that mostly say, the game's kind of okay. But then you ask them, did you play it with somebody else? And they go, no. I kind of go, that might be what you're missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like Gears of War. Like Gears of War is another game that like the first time I kind of just played it like single player, I was just like, okay, whatever, not that excited. When I sat down and played it with a friend, it was like, oh, I get it. This game just instantly skyrocketed to one of my all-time favorites.
Right. Yep. Yeah, no, I fully agree. I'd say if you don't have this game as is, can pick it up cheap on name the console or on Steam. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, but to Spencer's point too, I don't think I would have had nearly as much fun with the title in a single player setting as I did in multiplayer, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have completed the game on my own, to be honest. You know, it's like, I mean, it's fun, but the small amount of AI experience I've had with Sheva as an AI co-op partner, like, it's not for me. You know, and I could easily see some of those later levels like being extremely frustrating. You know,
well, it's some of the boss battles and stuff like that. That's where it gets tough. Because I remember I did a run a while back on Veteran, not even professional, in Veteran, and it was one of those ones where I'm pretty sure I got to the end because I remember getting to like Wesker and just being like having a mind melt of like battling him there. It's just like, oh god, like it's not me that's making this like get a game over all over. It's the computer just as, you know. Which, you know, and then there's other video games where the computer like walks in the face of like Gears of War, walks in the face of danger, no problem whatsoever. It's not a big deal. You know what I mean? Yep. But yeah, Resident Evil 5 kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the hard one. I'll say it's not. I'll say I don't think it's the computer's really like a god. Like some people make it off like it's like the worst AI. I'm like, I don't think it's necessarily that. No, I think it's just it's the Resident Evil design style is that your characters just aren't, especially when you're playing on the hard difficulties. They go down in like 2 hits. You know what I mean? It doesn't take much. Sometimes 1 hit's all it takes. You know, if you play it on professional mode, everything takes you down in like 1 hit. So don't even think about playing off the computer. Yeah, unless you like a real challenge, because the computer's going to still play it like it's on easy mode. Right,
exactly. Yeah, but no, I'm very glad we got to sit down and actually play through it, and it really wasn't. I mean, it was 3 sessions in total. It was basically like the first 2 play sessions were about 3 hours apiece, and then the final was like 2 hours, and it was pretty much like the last 2 levels. You know, it was like the final 2 hours of that play session.
Yeah, I would say it's about probably give or take about 10 hours or so, you know, for a first playthrough or so, give or take. Mm-hmm. You know, you watch all the cutscenes and all that stuff. And yeah, you know, as I said, there's just a lot there. The levels are very, you know, each level's like, or each kind of section's completely different. Like you're going through all types of stuff. You got the swamp levels, you got like the city areas, you got the little desert sections. I mean, you got, of course, the labs, you know, the oil fields and so on like that. So there's a lot of world here too, you know. I mean, the boat level where you're on the boat and you got to do you got to go switch the levers every single time to like open the gates and whatnot. It does give a lot of variety, even if it is all in the straight up action style, you know.
Yeah, no, fully agree. Yeah, it definitely has really great design all around. I enjoy the combat. I enjoy all the upgrade systems, the purchasing of new weapons, the trading with your partner, like in combat or out of combat. Like there's so many good W's in this game that I'll just revert back around again. Even at $20, game is absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
Even more so if you got a buddy to play with, for sure.
Yeah, well, because I remember like when they did that, like I think they released 4, 5, and 6 on physical copies. This was when PS4 came out. They were all $20 each. I just went out and bought all 3 of them. I'm like, yep, I'll take them all. And the only one I never played, ironically, was the Resident Evil 4 one because I just didn't like the controls on PlayStation. I'm like, I'm so spoiled by my Wii and GameCube ones that are like and even nowadays the MetaQuest version's freaking awesome. So it's like it kind of makes it hard to play that. You can. I'm not saying you can't, but like it just it felt off because it had the stupid L1 aiming and so on, which is probably there on the PS2 version. I just never played it. So, but yeah, grab some Resident Evil 5. It's just well worth it. It's a game that, as I said, it's once again, we mentioned it multiple times. It's either you're going to think it's the greatest Resident Evil of all time, or you'll be like a little bit thrown off and you might not be one of your favorites. I don't think anybody out there ever says like they hate this game. If they do, they're kind of lying themselves. I think they might not be one of their favorites, but, you can't really deny that it for what it is, it's still a pretty fun game. But yeah, check this out.
I think I fall directly into that category too for myself. It's like it's not my favorite thing either, but it's not the worst game I've ever played. Like it's easy, like just like a 7. It's a good game. Play the game and don't think about it too much.
Exactly. And I'll say this is once you probably play like some of the other stuff on there, like the mercenaries and everything like that, it starts adding points to it. Like, because that's kind of how the game is. I feel like that's probably what it is. Probably a 7 is a good thing. And then you add co-op. That's one more point. You add the mercenaries. That gives like another point. And then next thing you're like, oh, geez, this game's almost like a 9.5. But like because it stacks so much in there, But yeah, go out and grab this game. It's, if you want in the sense, the best of like action survival horror, like it just delivers all of that here. It's in that good old 360 PS3 area when stories were just all dialed in. Even if it does have a little bit of like, it's weird, I never noticed it back in the day, but it's a little bit of like that somewhat cheesy dialogue here and there. I mean, there are a couple of lines I know for sure, but we're like a little bit more over the top than you would expect. I know I say this coming from like, Resident Evil 1, but Resident Evil 1 was strangely designed in a way that was just so Japanese people knew what they were saying in English. They're like, that was the whole reason behind it. It was because it's like, you know what? They want to hear English so that it feels like an American movie, but you also have to make the English very simple. You know what I mean? Not too complex. So, but yeah, check it out. As I said, there's just cool stuff. Chev is a great character. There's just so much fun to be had. We got to get playing on some of that mercenaries and some of the extra modes because there's just more time you can put into it. But yeah, till then, I've put a link tree description below that sends us to all the other websites, all the other get comic books like Pizza Boys, Spotify list, and all that kind of fun stuff. Other podcasts. But till then, I'm Spencer Scott Holmes.
And I am Cameron.
And we'll see you some other time.